In the meantime, we have this. And we saw this in the 1990s a lot. It used to be a thing, and it looks like, after looking online, it's starting to make a comeback now because what is old is new again, right? People proclaiming that paying income tax is completely and totally voluntary. Yeah, you don't have to pay federal income tax. It's a scam. You're a sucker if you do. And there's all these ways that you'll hear on how to do this. It made headlines over the weekend. John McAfee, the antivirus tycoon, went off on Twitter about the IRS and saying he hasn't filed a tax return in 8 years, and say, hey, I'm a prime target for, I guess I'm a prime target to be audited, and calling the IRS saying, here I am, come get me. Haven't paid taxes in 8 years because you don't have to. Let me get Lydia Desnoyers on. She's a CPA on 700 WLW. And Lydia, I'm sure you hear this a lot. Is the federal tax system completely and utterly voluntary? Is there any way, unless I'm a big corporation, I don't have to pay taxes?
Absolutely not. If you try, good luck. Absolutely not. It's definitely a requirement if you make over a certain amount, which most people will meet that threshold. I think it's my personal opinion is that it's kind of irresponsible to make such statements, because people may attempt to not file and, may get in trouble. I was looking at his tweets, and one of the things that he did say is that he is done having income, and so perhaps, I find that hard to believe. If he's not generating any new income and just living off of money that he's already paid income taxes on, and prior to the 8 years, I think that's the main thing to take away is that if he does not have any income, then no, he doesn't have a filing requirement. But I find that very hard to believe if he's, investing, just on interest and dividends or whatnot, if he's investing properly, if he's as wealthy as, we know him to be, he should definitely be subject to. But, there may be scenarios where perhaps he's not. Subject, I find that hard-pressed to believe.
Yeah, you would think. It's almost like one of those ads at the bottom of a web page where it says, the IRS hates this, or try this one weird old trick for not paying taxes. Yeah, don't make any money. That's how you don't pay taxes.
Exactly. That's it. Don't make any money. But it's just, again, it's just irresponsible. I think it's wild. And, again, like his little disclaimer in one of his tweets is that he has no income. So, to just flat out say I haven't filed any taxes and, because there's nothing there is just, I don't think that's the full extent of the truth. And there may be scenarios. I mean, if he has a huge carryover loss from previous years that he's still using to offset his income, he may very well not be subject to taxes. But, or whatever he's generating income on, perhaps he's withholding enough and they're already taking out the taxes, because I went back and I read the tweet and it says I have not filed taxes. It didn't say I'm not paying taxes.
Right.
So there's a slight of the words, and it's So, I would love to know all the details. I'd love for him to be completely transparent and see what he's saying. And if he doesn't have a filing requirement and is able to live as lavishly as he does, more power to him if he found a way to do it. But I highly doubt it, and I really implore people to be careful not to fall to the hype. Exactly, because and here's the other interesting thing is that he's making these assertions the last few days, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. When the IRS is shut down right now, I think.
Yeah.
I mean,
right. That's a good.
It's like, hey, police come get me when the police station is completely closed and no police officers on duty. So
yeah.
We'll see what happens when everybody's back to work. Hopefully, we'll be soon. Hopefully, we'll get this government shutdown reverse, and everybody can, go back to making a living.
Right. And flipping off the IRS.
Exactly. It's almost like, hey, look at me, but the lights are off,
Right. Well, then the IRS they've cut a lot of bodies, too. So they're, and not just with the shutdown, but just in general, the IRS is condensed. So they obviously have audit power, Lydia, but at the same time, are they auditing as many people as they used to?
There has been a decrease in our audits in the past few years, like you mentioned, a reduction in manpower, and those kind of things. So yeah, we are seeing that. But I mean, I just think people need to be careful. I mean, if you're on social media on such a national chain, maybe they haven't come to you. And the thing is, the IRS will can take as long, for certain scenarios,
Right.
they can take several years to get to you, and then charge you interest and penalties for all those back due taxes. So I think he's I'm not sure he's thinking this through. I think he's making these wild claims, and I'm anxious to see how it's going to play out when, I mean, he's calling it out. So, I mean, they're going to get back to work. The IRS is going to be open again. And like you say, he's a prime target. And if he's calling him out, they're going to go after him.
You don't want to, generally, you don't want to do that, too. You may remember this, too. Lydia Desnoyers is a CPA. She's actually America's most fun CPA. Normally, they're boring and tired and old guys, and she's really cool. So I don't mind talking about numbers and stuff with Lydia. She's awesome. It was like back in the 90s, early 2000s, where all these guys came out of the woodwork and they're doing these seminars. Remember that, where they would say, "Oh, you're paying taxes, totally voluntary. I'll tell you why." And they'd make the rounds and stuff like that. And I think a couple of them went to prison because of that. And I think what they didn't tell you, the ones that were allegedly successful, was that they do these seminars about protesting taxes and loopholes and all this stuff, and go, "Listen, I get audited every year, and the IRS has never found anything." And it's because, well, the trick is that they're actually paying taxes but not telling you because they want to sell you. Of course they're going to declare every single penny because they may investigate you, but if you're paying taxes, and the IRS can't say anything because the law prevents them from talking about individuals' taxes. It's a perfect scam.
Exactly, and that's the other interesting part too of these claims and stuff, because the IRS really cannot come back and say, "Well, no, he pays taxes." They've given him a lot of trouble for that. So, it's kind of like a one-sided show. It's like they're making these assertions, and no one can come back and say, "Well, this is inaccurate, this isn't true." But again, people just have to be careful. I mean, the idea that you don't have to pay taxes. I wish, I obviously with my clients, I really work to reduce their amount. Finding
which
everything
is normal, right?
But I mean, there is a reason for taxes, and it was a whole separate conversation, and how it could be used more efficiently or more effectively. That's a whole separate conversation, and that we could do over drinks someday. But because I would probably need a few to have that conversation. But all that to say that it is required. It's something that's been around for a while. And, the idea that you don't have to pay taxes or don't have to file taxes, very, very few situations where you don't. But for the average American who's working, has income, you're going to have a filing requirement. So you don't want to take that chance, because the IRS may not reach out to you the same year that it's due, or even the next year, but they, generally speaking, they have up to 3 years. If they can prove that there's fraud or that you underpaid by a certain percentage, they can classify as fraud, and that just opens up Pandora's box, and they can go as far as they want to. And then, if they find that 1 year you filed and you owed, they can go back many more years. So it's not a chance you want to take. I mean, you just want to work with a professional and make sure you get every deduction that you can, and minimize your taxes, and there's a right way to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And, the idea that somehow the IRS, that taxes are voluntary, I don't even know where anyone got that idea from.
I have no idea. It's been mandatory for a very, very long time. Again, if you meet that filing threshold. But the fact that it's voluntary, I mean, if that were the case,
I think they get it confused because they call it voluntary compliance, which some people read to be, well, it's totally voluntary. Those are two different things.
Two different things. Yeah, you can volunteer not to do it, but you're going to have to suffer the consequences.
Right. Ask Wesley Snipes how things are going for Wesley Snipes, and a movie star of the 1980s, and he decided not to pay his taxes, and it doesn't generally end well for you too. The other thing too is if you're a CPA and you're promoting or doing that too, they're going to come after you and your clients, right?
Oh my God! Yeah, well, yeah. The IRS can audit or come after people through several reasons, and one of them is through association. And so, if there's one unscrupulous CPA, and they can tie them to several tax returns, and they may very well, start picking up their clients to make sure that they're collecting everything that they're supposed to be collecting. And there are CPAs who, get their licenses revoked, and the IRS provides a periodic report of those, CPAs or tax preparers who are no longer allowed to prepare taxes for reasons such as these. So, I'm not sure why anybody would think that's a good thing to do. I think people, where everybody's craving for attention these days, and maybe this is just another way for John McAfee to get attention. I mean, this is a guy who also said he's going to run for president just to have a platform to discuss taxes and stuff. Not taking the office seriously,
right.
And so you just got to be careful and know who you're dealing with and who you're listening to.
Lydia Desnoyers is a CPA. She's America's coolest CPA, as evidenced by the fact she actually sense of humor about stuff too. And going back, they can only get back like 7 years, right? Is that it?
It depends. So generally speaking, they can go after 3 years, to pull up 3 years from the date that you filed or the due date of the tax return. And if they can prove fraud, they can go even more. There's no statute of limitations.
Oh, really?
They can really go, yeah. So, but again, to prove fraud, remember one of the elements of fraud is intent. So it's kind of hard to prove that somebody intended to, aside from John McAfee, who's obviously putting it on social media that he intended, not to say. Right. But sometimes it is hard to prove the intent, and so sometimes it's kind of hard for them to prove that there's fraud and to open that door. But again, if they can prove, if they can show that you've underpaid by about, I believe it's like 25%, then that can put you in that fraud category, even if there's no intent. And again, there's no statute of limitation on that. They can go as far back as they need to.
Are there some people that can outsmart the IRS with that? And are you one of them?
Out there? Well, I you're putting me in a spot there. I did not want to be labeled amongst the John McAfee, but they're definitely. I've had scenarios where working. Keep in mind, the IRS is an entity, run by individuals. So you may find individuals there that you know more than. And I've had that scenario where I've been able to. Air quoting, argue with an agent, proving my point for my client, and have succeeded. So definitely there are scenarios where you can, plead your case to an IRS agent and be successful with it. Absolutely. You're working with individuals, and, if they're not trained properly or misread something that you have a good understanding on, a good grasp on, then absolutely there are people out there who can succeed against the IRS. There's plenty of cases out there.
Yeah, but as far as cheating them and not paying taxes, that's an entirely different matter. And so it's not voluntary. It's in the U.S. It's in the, I think in the code, U.S. Code, as a matter of fact, Title 26 of the U.S. Code. It says that you got to pay income tax. There's no voluntary element to that whatsoever. What's voluntary, though, is how we file taxes, right? Isn't that what they're talking about? It's the process of us essentially keeping our receipts and doing all the math ourselves, and then voluntarily sending the check to the IRS if we owe them.
Well, you have to file if you make over a certain amount. Now, what happens is there are some people who, if you have a straight W-2, you withhold enough. Mm-hmm. The IRS may very well do a calculation based on just your filing status or whatever. If it's simple enough, they may not bother you. And again, they have to be able to justify it. They have to be able to say, okay, well, this person, based on the income that's being reported by outside sources, which I'll go into in a little bit, but based on income being reported and withholding that has been withheld throughout the year, it's not worth it to go ask this person to put our manpower, because we may collect an extra $100. That doesn't make any sense. And so, the other thing you have to be careful, again, if you have income and stuff, is that even if you don't file, remember, people who pay you, they're required to send it to the IRS. So there isn't an independent way of the IRS saying, okay, well, your former employer, or, this employer or this contract, this business is reporting that they've paid you X amount. And based on this amount, you're supposed to be filing. We haven't received something, and then they can come after you if you didn't withhold enough. Mm-hmm. But again, they kind of have to make sure that one of the things that they look at is to say, okay, if what is the probability and what is the impact that it's going to have? So what's the probability that this person does owe, and how much do we think they're going to owe? Is it worth sending our manpower to investigate and to audit this person? And sometimes you may just get a letter, which is terrifying in and of itself, to get a letter from the IRS, just saying, hey, this is how much somebody's reporting that you made. You didn't withhold enough. Here's how much we think you owe. Mm-hmm. Then you can volunteer to say, hey, listen, I'm going to just go ahead and pay that amount that you're saying. Or, no, here are my receipts. Here are my additional deductions. I don't owe that much. So, again, back to your point of, there are some people who have been successful against the IRS, and, there are legit ways to do it. There are proper and correct ways to do it.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, making sure you keep good records, I guess, too. What flag is if you make a lot of money? I think the assumption is based on income, that's a greater flag for the IRS. If you make below a certain amount, they don't care about you. Is that a myth?
There have been some people who, obviously, the higher income you have, the more taxes you may be required to pay. So, from that standpoint, the IRS, they are going to, they're going to spend out their manpower and their resources. They're going to go after people with higher income because chances are those are the people who are going to owe a lot. Now, keep in mind that if you're a straight W-2 making, X amount, $1 million something dollars, but you're also withholding enough,
right.
Just because you make a lot doesn't mean that you're going to get audited or you're going to come after you if they think that the incremental amount that you may owe is worth it or it's not worth it.
Gotcha.
And so, again, when you talk about red flags, I mean, this John McAfee guy just, telling the IRS, hey, come after me. Just use some common sense. The IRS does use social media just like any other entity does. Employers use it to vet out their candidates. The IRS is using it to look at what people are flashing and what they're talking about. If you're reporting that you don't have if you're not reporting anything or, reporting a loss and all that stuff, but then
Gotcha.
on your social media, your brand new yacht.
They're looking at that, though, too. That's what's crazy. They look at social. Wow. That's bonkers. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
Absolutely.
Well, if you got a lot of plates in the air, make sure you hire someone like Lydia, who's also hella entertaining too. Lydia Desnoyers, CPA. I'm sure we'll be talking again in the immediate future about other related tax things. But the thing is, income taxes are not voluntary. Yes, you have to pay them. Is the bottom line. Thanks again, Lydia. Have a great week. Appreciate it.
You too. Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye.
there you go.